Hi, my name is Julian. I've been playing Flesh and Blood for just over a year. My favorite hero, as you might have guessed, is Kano, Drakai of Ether. I've been playing him for most of the time during Flesh and Blood.
All right, perfect. So then please elaborate more on why do you play Kano? Why did you choose him?
Yeah, for sure. So initially, I chose Kano after watching the Pro Tour 1 games of Alexander Vor. I saw the power that he was exposing of just being able to kill his opponent in ridiculous ways, even when the game state looked pretty bad for him. And I was immediately hooked. So I went down a rabbit hole. I watched all the Arsenal Pass videos. I learned all the combo mechanics that I could and fell in love with the hero. One of the things I really like about Kano is because he typically is playing solitaire to some extent, it's actually really easy to practice Kano, even if you're not on a testing team, because the best way to learn Kano is actually just to goldfish the combo and see all the different lines that are available to you and learn how to do the math very quickly. So all those factors combined are why I started playing Kano. And as I started taking to events, I consistently did fairly well with him. So I just kept playing him, and ultimately I was able to win a Battle Hardened with him.
Yeah, we will talk about the Battle Hardened 2 later, but before we come to that, let's talk about these two sides that I want to highlight in the video, the toxic side and the unique side. So please tell me at first, why is Kano so unique, or what makes Kano unique?
Yeah, there's a few things that make Kano unique. The first thing, obviously, is all of his damage is arcane damage. So he does fairly well into heroes that don't want to bring a lot of natural AB or have a lot of natural prevention. The other thing that makes him unique, I think, is his damage output is the highest in the game. Especially when he gets to second cycle, he can do literally above 200 to 300 damage pretty easily if you play the right cards in the right order. And the last thing I would say that makes Kano unique is the fact that his skill ceiling is very, very high. I think a lot of heroes in the game are really easy to pick up and play at a fairly decent level. Kano's a hero where once you pick him up, you're probably going to lose the majority of your games for the first month while you're learning how he plays. And then after a while, I think there is quite a high reward where once you're able to understand how to play the hero at a high level, you'll start winning games due to your opponent's lack of knowledge or being able to see lines that other people won't be able to.
So when you combine Kano to the more normal heroes in Flesh and Blood, can you dive deeper into that? Maybe with a comparison on Fi.
Yeah, so Fi, I think, is a very typical linear aggro deck. So when you're playing Fi, you can typically value his cards at around 3. So if he's holding a 4-card hand, you can anticipate that he might be able to do anywhere from 12 to 16 damage, depending on if he has his power cards or not. You're also going to want to play around Mask Momentum, so you're going to be thinking about, okay, if he hits 3 cards in a row, I'm going to let him draw. Maybe there's some on hits that I need to block, and maybe he can end with something like Assault the Wound that's going to do a lot of damage. So you're thinking about how to mitigate damage that way. When you're playing against a Kano, it's a completely different experience. Typically, he's on the defensive most of the game, so you oftentimes feel like you're at an advantage going into the game. You're going to get him down to really low life. He starts at 30 life to begin with, and you're going to just be looking to close out the game in the most safe way possible. But what makes Kano different is he's going to condense all of his damage and most of his thinking into a single turn, where he's going to try and kill you with a very powerful Aether Wildfire combo. And so typically what a game against Kano will look like is you're smashing him into the ground for 5 to 10 minutes, and then you present lethal, and you think you've won. And if you haven't played against Kano before, you're going to be very surprised to find out that he can do upwards of 36 damage fairly easily with the right cards in his hand.
So then let's talk about the other side. Why are players viewing Kano as toxic, and maybe even in this example we just had with Fi?
Yeah, I think, as I said, that the reason that people view Kano as being a toxic hero is because, especially for new players, he can be very unfun to play against because if you don't bring the interaction, the ways to interact with them, for example, Arcane Barrier or damage prevention cards like Oasis Respite, you're essentially watching Kano play the game, and you can't interact with him while he's thinking, and then he's going to tell you whether you're dead or not. And for a lot of people, that can be a little frustrating, especially since Flesh and Blood, for the rest of the heroes, is a very typical back and forth where you're dealing damage to each other and you're doing a lot of thinking. Where with Kano, all of that's condensed into a single turn, and if you don't have the prevention, there's literally nothing you can do about it.
So let's dive deeper into that. Let's point out the most important parts about what makes Kano toxic.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that makes Kano toxic is the fact that all of his damage is arcane and his damage stacks exponentially. So if you don't have prevention and you aren't able to block his Aether Wildfire, he's going to be able to do 36 damage very easily. And I demonstrated that in the finals of the Battle Hardened Orlando.
So let's talk about the finals then in more depth, because I think that's a good example. Like, what I've heard of and what I've seen online is that the problem at the tournament was also that people were not really respecting the Kano being around, right? So they weren't even prepared. Even if they wanted to side something in, they couldn't.
Absolutely. And talking to some of the players later, Kano's a deck that if you want to have equity against him, you're going to need to bring typically 3 to 5 cards. You're going to need to bring 3 sources of Arcane Barrier and maybe 2 to 3 copies of Oasis Respite. And that's quite a tall order to ask for when Kanos typically only represent 5 or 6% of a meta at a particular event. The one thing I would point out, though, is people that will play Kano in an event are going to be diehard Kano players, and they're going to have a lot of experience on the hero. And as I mentioned before, Kano has a very high skill ceiling. So even though there might only be 5 or 6 Kanos in the room, especially in a post-Icelander meta, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that there's always going to be 2 Kanos at least at the top tables these days. And so I think even though it's a small percentage of the overall meta, there should be an expectation that you'll play at least 1 Kano at a top table if you make it there. And so I think that's why, and that's how you should justify bringing the necessary prevention to be able to play a good game into Kano.
Let's jump into the backlash for players that watch the video till the end, because they want to get something out of it to handle the toxicity that can come with playing against Kano. So what would you suggest for those players to prepare when they go into a tournament like a Battle Hardened?
Yeah, do you mean to play against Kano or playing as Kano?
Yes. Yeah. At first, you need to think about Kano, right? But then how are you actually going to prepare for him?
Sure. So I think the number one tip I would have when learning how to play against Kano is to learn the very basic combos that he can assemble and how to calculate the math to see how much damage he's going to do to you. And that will tell you whether you're in kill range or not, and whether you need to block his Aether Wildfire. So a very typical heuristic, if Kano does a Wildfire into any spell into Blazing Aether combo, the first spell is going to be Wildfire, and for every point of damage that does, it's going to deal 5 points of damage to you. That's just the way the math works with it being cumulative. So if you're at, let's say, 30 life, and you know that he is buffing Wildfire twice, you can do the math to say, okay, he's probably going to be able to do 30 damage here. I need to block at least 1 point of this to save 5 life, and then he won't be able to kill me. Typically, Kanos will only combo when you're presenting lethal, because they try to prolong the game as long as possible to assemble their different combo pieces. And in that case, understanding if you're in lethal range or not is very important, as it can let you hold on to cards, or it can let you present lethal again if he does end up blocking. The second thing I would say is understanding all of the different cards Kano has at his disposal and counting when he blocks with them, so you can see how many he has left in his deck. So oftentimes, Kano will want to arsenal one of his combo pieces, and Arsenal Disruption is extremely powerful against Kano. That's one of the reasons, for example, the Azalea matchup can be very hard, is because she has access to Inertia, Seek and Destroy, Command and Conquer. All of these cards that, if they hit, will destroy Kano's arsenal. And that's one of the most powerful ways that you can interact with Kano. And the last thing I would say is understanding how to hide information from your Kano opponent is very important as well. So oftentimes, if you have a hand of, let's say, 3 reds and a blue, you're going to instinctively want to pitch the blue and then play all your red cards just to present the most amount of damage in a particular turn. Against Kano, it can actually be important to hide that information. So even though it's less damage, if your Kano opponent's at 1, and you know that when you present lethal, he's going to try and kill you anyway, oftentimes you can pitch a red card to play another red card and hold on to 2 cards. And now you're putting Kano in a very difficult spot, because he has to guess, based off of the game state, based off of what you've pitched, what are the odds that you're holding on to a blue and a red, a blue and a yellow, 2 reds, 2 blues, and he has to do all of the damage calculation for all those different lines to see how he should play out the turn. So holding on to your cards and pitching in weird patterns can be another way to gain equity in the Kano matchup.
All right, so it's really difficult, I think, to at first look at Kano and get what he actually is, but then also differentiating him from all the other heroes that are in the game. And there is this common knowledge now that Flesh and Blood is a fighting game. It's a back and forth. That's what makes it unique. But Kano kind of breaks that, right? Kano is on a different axis, and you already explained what that axis is with the arcane damage. So how can players like understand what a Kano player really likes to play? Because also one of your last tips was like the Kano player is kind of like a wizard, right? You really, when you play ninja, you like this like going fast and bam, bam, bam. And with a Kano player, it's really different. Like he likes to warp time in a sense, I think, and gets this insights on when is the right time to shoot all my spells off, because then my fire is gone. And maybe you can explain from your point of view, like what is Kano actually in Flesh and Blood compared to those fighting heroes?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's an interesting one to think about. To me, Kano, there's two things that Kano really embodies. The first is Kano is the strongest hero against fatigue decks in the format. So, for example, if you've played Boost Dash at all, or decks that will potentially lose to like old versions of Oldhim or Bravos that just want to block a lot, it can be a very frustrating experience where eventually you'll run out of all the damage in your deck, and your opponent will still be at like 10 to 20 life, and you lose very long, drawn-out games. Kano, that will never happen to, because what Kano's able to do is he's able to pitch all of his combo pieces in a particular order, and when he hits them, he'll be able to do so much damage that literally no hero will ever be able to block it in the game. And so for me, one of the things that really appeals to me about Kano is the fact that I never have to worry about a fatigue state, because if I get second cycle, I will win most of my games. The other thing I think that Kano embodies in the game is sort of a glass cannon, where his damage output is probably the highest in the game with the right set of cards, but he also starts with 30 life, which is very unique. You have a few other heroes who start at less life, but nobody starts at 30 life. And so Kano is sort of he's kind of a trickster hero. You can almost think of him as like Loki from the Avengers or something. I think he's very tricky. He's very powerful, but he's also very weak, and he's very susceptible to, as I said, disruption in the form of arsenal disruption or hand disruption, and he's very susceptible to just dying because he has such low life.
All right, so life is a resource, right? You kind of said it. But I know, like, as long as you have one life left, it doesn't matter how much life you lost, right? So is it even an advantage for other players that Kano has 10 life less to start with?
It's a good question. I think when you first play against Kano for the first time, you're going to see that he has 30 life, and you're going to think, oh, this is going to be the easiest game of my life. There's no way he can kill me in time. And then you start to sort of realize all of his cards block for 3. He does have access to the highest amount of damage in the game. So I think it's less of a disadvantage, and it's more of a balancing effort, where if Kano started at 40 life, he would always be able to get a second cycle, and he would always be able to pitch deck an unstoppable combo. But the fact that he's at 30 life forces him to play in a more aggressive manner, where he has to play off the top and play for first cycle and have a little bit less consistency. Whereas I think if Kano had access to higher life totals or armor or the ability to prolong the game to second cycle, he would pretty much have the highest win percentage in the game.
Yeah. Okay. I think in the comparison, I want to also bring up maybe Icelander. I'm not sure how to compare her with Kano, but I know that Kano was like kind of pulled down by Icelander and all the frostbites, right?
Yeah. So I would say it's interesting to compare Icelander to Kano directly, because obviously they're both wizards and they both do arcane damage. But Michael Hamilton popularized a build of Icelander called Bolander, which had a lot of attack actions in it. So what the best Icelander decks ended up looking like was a more value-oriented sort of trade down, prolong the game, present a lot of resource disruption through frostbites, and eventually reach a state where your opponent's on 5 to 10 life and you're able to combo them in response. Whereas Kano usually doesn't run attack actions, except for the occasional Nourishing Emptiness, and he wants to essentially prolong the game just long enough to be able to assemble his combo, and he'll kill you no matter what your life total is at. I do think that both of them being wizards, they both did disrupt you in unique ways. Icelander disrupted you by giving you frostbites and forcing you to play inefficiently by having to overpitch for cards because they all cost 1 more. Kano does disrupt you, but in a very different way. He doesn't give you frostbites, but he will, if you don't block his damage, he will just kill you. And, killing you is probably the best form of disruption. I do think they're more similar than they are different. I think what makes Kano a little bit more frustrating to have to sideboard against is because Icelander was typically a larger percentage of the meta, and Kano is a very small percentage of the meta typically at events. So it feels worse to have to bring in 5 cards for a matchup that is only 5 or 6 people in a room versus bringing in cards for Icelander, which is a very known quantity and typically was 20 or 30% of an event sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is like a core problem not only of Flesh and Blood, but of all competitive games where there are like these kind of niche decks that you need to prepare for. Maybe I will face them, but then you don't want to spend too much resources on them because if you don't end up facing them, it was a waste. And I think that is like maybe also part of the toxic communication because people really dislike this. And I want to know your opinion on this as a Kano player because I think on the other side, this is also really unique because we have that of a variance in the meta, right? And that makes it so like blooming to have the option of choosing your favorite hero and going into a tournament and not really having no chance because oh, it's not the best deck. But if you have the experience, you can make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons I love Flesh and Blood so much is because it's a game that really rewards specialists. So if you're able to learn a hero, no matter what the hero is, I don't care if you're playing Arachne or you're playing Riptide, if you know your hero better than everybody else at the event, and you've practiced your matchups and you know what your game plan is, you can win any event on any hero, even if it's not the meta pick or it's not what pro players are playing. That's just the way Flesh and Blood works. And it's the reason I've been able to have such success on Kano, even though I was playing Kano before Icelander Living Legend when it was a Lexi meta, and Lexi was not a great matchup for Kano.
Yeah, perfect. So let me look at my questions because we covered a lot already.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe you can explain once more what is the main win strategy with Kano in a really small amount of time. I think you did a great job already at the We Make Best video where you like kind of said like these are the 3 cards that you need to pull off and that's your win condition.
Yeah, for sure. So Kano typically has 2 strategies depending on the decks he's playing against. The first is going to be against aggro decks where he's not going to be able to reach second cycle. Those game states, he's going to be looking to play out potions when he can, block out and prolong the game until he's able to arsenal a combo piece, which will typically be Blazing Aether, Lessons in Lava, or Aether Wildfire. And then once he reaches his combo pieces assembled, he's going to play Aether Wildfire fully buffed, followed by a middle spell, followed by a Blazing Aether, and being able to do 25 to 36 damage depending on how much his opponent blocks. Against slower decks where he can reach second cycle, he'll typically bring in defensive cards and block out and start pitch stacking an unstoppable combo, which will be comprised of different blues, tomes followed by 2 blues that he can draw into, and then again Aether Wildfire and Blazing Aether pitched in particular orders so that when he reaches them, he can play them all off the top at once and do 200 to 300 damage.
Okay. Then maybe you can also elaborate more on the matchups because you already said like there are some matchups that Kano has a clear edge on, and then there are other matchups that are not that favored. Maybe you can mention the most important ones.
For sure. I think Kano has quite a good matchup spread at the moment. I think the hardest matchup in the game for Kano has always been Prism, just because he doesn't have a way to interact with her auras, and her current build has access to a lot of Ward and Spell Void, which is very hard for Kano to get around when he's trying to do his Aether Wildfire combo. 2 other really hard matchups is Reinhardt and Boost Dash. Both of them are able to present quite a bit of damage, so you're not able to pitch stack them for second cycle, but they also have access to natural AB3 with their equipment and quite a lot of blues, which makes it very hard for Kano to kill them. I think more aggressive matchups are typically favored for Kano or coin flips. For example, Fi and Katsu, even though they're able to present a lot of damage, they don't typically have as high of a blue count or natural AB3, so you're able to kill them once you chip them down to around 30 life, because they'll often have to tap out to present lethal. And then I think there's a lot of other matchups that are quite skill intensive. For example, Azalea is a matchup where if they find the right disruption and they play their cards correctly, it can be very hard to win. But there's also a lot of skill expression in blocking correctly and assembling your combo and finding the right cards at the right time. Lastly, I would say really easy matchups for Kano are going to be Bravo. Even though he has a lot of blues and does usually run AB3, you're able to get to second cycle pretty easily against Bravo. And once you get there, you can kill him through any amount of damage prevention. And then also Azuri and Dromai. Dromai was actually thought of as a bad matchup for quite a while. But these days, she's running so many red cards and so little prevention that the matchup can be quite favored for Kano. And Azuri is in the same boat where even though she can sometimes run Oasis, she runs so many red cards that it's pretty easy to kill, even if they have Oasis or some amount of AP.
All right. I have some base questions too to understand really how Kano works, because there is this mechanic of holding priority, is it called?
Yes.
And maybe you can explain like the core concept of it to me.
Yeah, so Kano is a deck that relies quite heavily on sequencing your cards in the right order, and that's why goldfishing is such an important part of practicing, because even if you get the right cards and you have deterministic lethal, if, for example, you activate Storm Strategies at the wrong time or you activate Ragamuffin's Head at the wrong time, you won't be able to play your combo correctly and you'll just lose the game on the spot. And so holding priority is a really important tool that Kano has at his disposal, because it's going to allow him to empty his hand in the right way such that he can Ragamuffin's Hat. Because Ragamuffin's Hat says that you can only play it when you have a single card in your hand. And so oftentimes what you need to do is, for example, pitch to Kano twice and then hold priority so that those haven't resolved yet. And now you only have a single card in your hand. Maybe it's a Blazing Aether that you want to put on top of your deck. So you'll then activate Ragamuffins in response. The Ragamuffins will resolve first, so your Blazing Aether will go on top of your deck. And then the Kanos that you previously pitched to will resolve, so you can then banish the Blazing Aether. So holding priority and changing the order that you play the cards is a really powerful and essential tool to learn when you want to play Kano at a high level.
That's also why cards like Against the Ages are so good, right? Because you can kind of like opt and change the order of the cards.
Absolutely. Yeah, opting is something we haven't covered, but it's probably one of the most powerful tools Kano has at his disposal, since he's allowed to play off the top of his deck. If he has perfect information about what cards are on top of his deck through opting, it lets him play the game optimally and oftentimes kill your opponent. So Gaze the Ages is one of my personally favorite cards, because it says not only can you opt to and then change the order, Gaze will actually also come back to your hand, so you'll be able to pitch to banish one of the two cards you just looked at.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, there was another thing I saw. Maybe we can talk about the instant speed aspect of the game too, because that's kind of unique.
Yeah.
What actually, I think that's also a part of the uniqueness, right? The instant speed.
I think one of the things that makes Kano unique to play against is the fact that he is able to play most of his spells at instant speed if he banishes them off the top. And if that's not something you're used to, it can be quite a change of pace, where you might present an attack and not be used to the fact that your opponent can respond before it resolves, or just kill you in response, because typically the rest of Flesh and Blood looks like you kill your opponent on your turn and they kill you on their turn. But Kano changes that around and says, no, I can actually play spells on your turn and I will always kill you on your turn with Aether Wildfire. And the reason that that's enabled is for two reasons. One, Kano's hero power says he can banish cards off the top of his deck and play them at instant speed. So pretty much any card in his deck he can play at instant speed that way. And then secondly, he has access to Storm Striders, which is the most powerful equipment in the game, in my opinion. And that says you can pay one and then play your next card at instant speed. So not only can Kano play cards off the top of his deck at instant speed, he can also play cards from his arsenal at instant speed with Storm Striders, and he can play cards from his hand at instant speed by Ragamuffinsing them on top if he plays his combo properly.
Right. How can people then learn actually what instant speed it really does in the Kano matchup and how to interact with it?
Yeah, if you want to learn how instant speed works, I think actually playing online is a great way to do that. Talishar has great visualizations for how the layering works. So when you play a card, you'll see it go on the stack, and then you can see that you can either hold priority or pass priority and still play in response. And you'll see that things sort of resolve in the opposite order that they go on the stack. So I think playing on Talishar is a great way to learn it. I also think once you're familiar with the rules and how it works, Goldfishing Kano is a great way to get familiar with it as well. Just draw 4 cards and play through your hands and see all the different ways Kano can sort of manipulate his cards to play them in fun ways. A great example is Aether Flare and Snapback are 2 cards that, when combined on your own turn, you can actually play fully buffed Aether Flare, and then you can play Snapback at instant speed afterward, and you'll get buffed by the Aether Flare. So it's a fun combo that Kano has at his disposal.
And for people that don't play on Talishar, how can they kind of learn the concept?
Yeah, I would recommend finding, if you have access to a local game store or armories, finding someone at your armories that is a wizard player, maybe somebody that played Icelander in the past, because Icelander was a more popular hero and also played quite a bit at instant speed, and maybe asking to play some games against them and having them explain it to you could be another great way. There's other heroes in the game that also do play at instant speed quite a bit. Dash.io is another example of a hero who can play items at instant speed. So it's not just Kano that has this ability. Prism is another person who can play quite a lot of cards at instant speed.
Yeah. Okay, so then I have a moment from stream that I watched as Peter was playing, and he was playing at the top 8 against Dash. And one strategy that Dash player was using, if I was seeing it right, was that he was not doing that many actions during his own turn, but kind of was doing like one chip damage and then ending his turn. So how is that really slowing Kano down?
Yeah, for sure. I think holding on to a blue card on your own turn can be a viable way to beat Kano players, especially newer Kano players. I think the thing to look out for if you take that strategy is you need to watch what your Kano opponent is pitching. If you see them start to pitch combo pieces, for example, if you see them pitch an Aether Wildfire or a Blazing Aether, and then a bunch of blues and maybe some tomes, they could be setting up for a really powerful second cycle. So it's important in that case for you to then apply as much pressure as possible to end the game before they can get there. Because Kano is able to draw so many cards with his Tome of Aetherwind, and he's able to banish cards off the top of his deck, he is able to reach second cycle quite a bit before his opponent. So you're typically able to do it in maybe 9 to 10 turns. However, if you identify that Kano has assembled his combo and is just waiting for you to tap out, then I do think ending your turn early and holding onto a blue can be a viable way to prevent him from killing you.
Okay. Then let's dive a little bit into the Battle Hardened. I'm not sure if I will include the Battle Hardened specifically, but maybe you have some points that fit into. So tell me, like, how was it playing Kano at the Battle Hardened in general?
Yeah, for sure. Playing Kano is always a fun time. Your games go fairly quickly, so typically what you do at an event is you're going to play your game in 5 to 10 minutes, and then you're going to walk around and look at the top tables. And one of the things I noticed at the Battle Hardened, which surprised me, was there wasn't actually as much Dash and Reinar as I was afraid of, because those are both quite hard matchups. And there was a lot of Azuris at the top tables, which is a very favorable matchup. So once I was able to make it a few rounds in, and I was able to be at the top tables, I was quite confident that I would be able to do well, just because my matchup spread looked quite good at the top tables. I did have a friend who played Kano at that event as well, and he had a much harder bracket than me, but he was able to top 8 on quite a different deck list. So shout out to him for doing so well. He played an AB3 Katsu and a Spell Void for AB4 Vincent, which are both very hard matchups.
Okay, so how was it then winning with Kano? I mean, you didn't lose a single game, right?
Yeah, I went undefeated on the day. It was obviously a great feeling to finally win an event. It was sort of a goal I had when I started playing Kano. Another reason I was really excited to play Kano was he's quite a unique hero and not a lot of people play him. So when you do well with Kano, you get a little bit more recognition than you would if you win a Battle Hardened on a hero that a lot of other people are playing. So taking down a CC rated event with Kano is obviously an amazing feeling. Gives me quite a bit of confidence going into the new year, and it's sort of a great way to end the year. And maybe next year I'll find a new hero that I want to devote a lot of time to, and maybe win a rated event on him as well.
Perfect. I hope so for you. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
So why is Kano then so strong at the moment? I mean, we talked about Icelander a little bit, but are there other factors that come into it now?
I think the biggest reason that Kano is strong at the moment is with Icelander Living Legend, a lot of decks that couldn't play before, that were very redline focused, for example, Azuri, are quite a bit stronger now that they don't have to worry about Frostbite Disruption. And so you see a lot of them doing fairly well, and they have good matchups across the board, so they'll be at the top tables. So if, as a Kano player, you're able to make it to the top tables in this meta, I do think you can do quite well. The one other thing I think that will help you as a Kano player is if you make it to the top tables, the players you'll be playing against are going to be playing very optimized deck lists, and they're going to be not wanting to respect Kano because doing so can lose you quite a bit of equity in other matchups. So it's really important as Kano that you win your early rounds, because if you lose your first round, you'll be paired against other players who lost, and oftentimes they'll be playing heroes and decks that are less optimized, and those might be better into Kano just because maybe they're running AB3 and Oasis because they have a local Kano player that they hate playing against. Doing well early is important as Kano, and if you make it to the top tables, I think it's quite favored for you.
I have a little spark at the moment because people are so upset about Kano running around, right? But you were just talking about the local Kano player. So maybe if there was a few more local Kano players, people wouldn't be upset about it because they are used to playing him.
Yeah, I do think, on the topic of local Kano players, I think everybody has that one player who loves to play Kano at events. And it can be really important that when those players go to armories, Kano players, that you really are being a good opponent to play against. So if you know you're playing against a new player, for example, on Kano, then let them flip their equipment over and pretend they have AB instead of maybe they didn't bring any AB and they have no chance to win the game. If they've really never played against Kano before, I think it's really important that you explain what you're doing as you do it and give your opponent the chance to make the right decision. It's just good etiquette, and it will help them have a better impression of Kano in the future versus losing horribly to the hero and never wanting to play against it again.
Yeah, perfect. That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about the future. We don't want to make up a glass.
Yeah.
How does it called in English?
I know. I know. I know what you mean. I think in the near future, people will respect Kano quite a bit more. Since he did quite well at the Realm event recently, and I was able to take down the Battle Hardened on him, I think it would be expected that there will be more Arcane Barrier present and quite a bit more people running Oasis Respite. Certainly, I wouldn't expect to run into another AB0 no Oasis Azuri. So personally, I probably won't be bringing Kano to the next 1 to 2 events, but I would expect that after another month or two of other heroes being quite prevalent, people will forget the power of Kano. And Kano's a deck that always preys on people disrespecting him. So I think maybe in another 2 to 3 months, he'll have his time to shine. And I don't think that Kano will ever be a hero that will fully go away, because even last year, when it wasn't considered a good meta for Kano, I was able to do quite well with him just by being very good at the deck, knowing all my matchups, and having good game plans into every hero.
So we talked about why is it so hard to play against Kano. Who can play? Yeah, we talked about how to prepare for him. I have a question that maybe you're not able to answer, but
Sure.
Did you play Yu-Gi-Oh?
No, I did not play Yu-Gi-Oh! This is my first card game, actually. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. What have you done before?
So, my history with gaming, I was quite into tabletop gaming. So I had a lot of local friends, and my wife would play board games pretty regularly, and card games were always my favorite type of game. Unfortunately, my gaming groups didn't like them quite as much as I did. And so I actually sought out my local game store to play some card games, and I found out about Flesh and Blood because they had quite a good scene. And yeah, that's how I was introduced to the game, and I just fell in love with it.
Yeah, that's an important factor, right? That you have the people in front of you. Playing on Talishar is a way to learn, but it's not really a way to enjoy the game.
No, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I can close out because Yu-Gi-Oh! I was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player before I entered Flesh and Blood, but not a competitive one. I was just like enjoying the games, going to tournaments with my friends and like funning around. Mm-hmm. But in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The mechanics changed up just like with Kano. It's basically Kano against Kano every time.
Okay.
And before it was like Fi against Fi every time. And then they kind of changed the mechanics because in Yu-Gi-Oh! You also have these different speeds, the spell speeds, as it called. And so you have speed 1, speed 2, speed 3. Mm-hmm. And then you have like cards that you can pull at instant speed, so to say, like in Flesh and Blood. Yeah. So I don't know. You maybe know Pot of Greed, right?
Yeah, I've heard of Fabled for sure.
Yeah. So the player plays Pot of Greed. That card is still banned. OP, just +1. And then there is a card that you can throw in as the opponent player and say like, no, it's just no. You don't get to draw.
Yeah,
and so there are a lot of those cards now.
Yeah, maybe an interesting point to talk about as well is Kano is a hero that if he ever became the best deck in the format, I think he would instantly become the worst deck in the format, because Kano is a hero that if you are expecting a lot of Kano and you want to never lose to Kano, just put 3 copies of Oasis Respite in your deck and 3 Arcane Barrier and increase your blue count a little bit if you're able to. So I do think Kano is always going to be a deck that exists sort of on the fringe. Maybe he'll be an A tier deck or a B tier deck, but it's only going to be specialists that play him, because there's a huge time investment that's required to be able to be competent with the hero. So I wouldn't expect a lot of people to ever show up on Kano, and I would never expect him to be the best deck in the format. If we ever were in a place where, it was a top 8 just comprised of Kanos, the game would not be very fun for anybody to play.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah,
it's so hard for the beginners too, right? I guess like the point that you made with Kano players being open and friendly and inviting to learn the game against Kano is really important. I had that myself, where I play with a friend sometimes. We're just casually playing like commoner games here. Mm-hmm. And then I told him, like, he was like, oh, it's amazing. Reiner against Fi, that's so much fun. And then I was like, okay, there's one hero I need to show you. And then he was like, okay, I'm never playing again.
Yeah, one other thing maybe to mention as well is, Kano has this ability to kill you in one turn with this Aether Wildfire combo. That's a fairly known quantity. But I would say other heroes in the game also have a similar ability to high roll you. It just looks a little bit different. So, for example, if you've ever sat across from Akatsu and he says no blocks and he holds a 5-card hand, and then all of a sudden he goes Surging Strike into Whelming into Bonds into Descendant into Bonds, and the game's essentially over at that point. And it can be a hard way to lose as well. But I do think that Kano's not the only hero who has the ability to do these crazy amounts of damage. You also see Dash.io do these crazy turns where they're able to play Tome of Fiendel from Arsenal and play a Boom Grenade, get their action point back, and do 30 to 40 damage on a turn pretty easily. So I think that high damage ceilings is a thing that exists in Flesh and Blood, and what makes Kano unique is he's able to do it on your turn. But other heroes also have the ability to do it on their own turn, and I think it's an important part of Flesh and Blood that everybody's able to take those losses, and be okay with it and have a good time, because we're all here to play a game and have fun.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's more than enough. Like, that's perfect, really.
Yeah.
Oh man, are you going to Pro Tour in the future?
I think so. I have plans now to go with a few of my teammates to LA. I'm not very good at limited, so I'll be practicing for that quite a bit. And I'm not sure if I'll be on Kano, but yeah, you might see me there.
Yeah, I will not be at LA, but I will be at Amsterdam. So I'm not sure if you're coming over.
I don't have plans to now. I only have one invite, so I think LA is first, and we'll see if I get another one. But sure. I'm excited to if I get the chance.
Yeah, I would love to meet you.
Yeah, you said you were at Baltimore last year, or did you?
Yeah.
Did you go to? Okay, so I'm very local to Baltimore, so if there's never a calling there or something, let me know, and yeah, I'd love to get together.